Good morning to all the participants. I welcome you on behalf of Madras Tax Bar for our 110th webinar today. Today's webinar is by Rohan Muralidharan, which is on Endgame. So Rohan will be touching upon the highlights of the first session which he conducted, and then he will just touch upon a few more topics which he missed out on that day due to time constraints. And end of the talk, we will have the discussion round. I suppose there were a lot of questions that time, which we are not able to take up due to time constraints. So today we can cover up all of those aspects. So thank you, Rohan, once again. Over to you. You can start.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I thank the Madras Tax Bar for giving me this opportunity once again to present on this topic. As I said the previous time, the reason why I chose this topic is because of the constitutional and interpretational issues which are involved with respect to alcohol, whether it is service tax or whether it is VAT or whether it is GST, because of the merger of different laws. There are various issues which emerge in this industry, and that is the reason why I have chosen this topic. So without wasting much of your time, I would directly deep dive into today's presentation. The agenda that I have chosen is to give you a brief recap of the constitutional aspects, what are the legislative entries, the fields of legislation, etc., and then deal with certain specific issues which are there in this industry. So, constitutional aspects and its recap. Now, prior to introduction of GST, as we all know, the legislative powers of the Parliament and the state legislature has been enshrined in Article 246 of the Constitution. So the power to make laws with the Parliament or the state legislature flows from Article 246. The fields of legislation as to on what all topics or what all subjects can the Parliament or the state legislature can legislate flows from the Schedule 7 to the Constitution of India. So what is Schedule 7? As we all know, it is divided into three lists. List 1, which is colloquially referred to as the Union List. The Parliament has the exclusive power to make laws under List 1. List 2, which is the state list. The state legislature has the exclusive power to make laws under the state list. List 3 is the concurrent list, wherein both the center and the state have the power to make laws. But if there is a conflict, the state law will yield in favor of the central law, which flows from Article 254 of the Constitution of India. Now, the legislative entries that we need to keep in mind are entry 84 of List 1. Entry 84 of List 1, as it existed then, prior to introduction of GST, basically provided for levy of excise duty on manufacture of goods other than alcoholic liquor for human consumption. So, manufacture of all goods other than alcoholic liquor for human consumption was covered under entry 84 of List 1. Insofar as the state's power under List 2 is concerned, excise duty on alcoholic liquor for human consumption was part of List 2, which is entry 51. So excise duty other than alcohol, the center had the exclusive power. Excise duty on alcohol, the state had the exclusive power. And in under entry 54, which talks about the levy of sales tax, VAT on intrastate sale of alcoholic liquor for human consumption was also within the state domain. So this was broadly the distribution of powers insofar as the alcohol industry is concerned, pre-GST. Now we come to post-GST. Now, as we all know, post-GST, excise duty and VAT, CST, etc. has been merged into one law, which is the goods and service tax. However, certain specific products have been kept out of the GST ambit. Those products will be continued to be governed by the erstwhile excise law as well as the VAT law. Now, what are these products? We all know that all petroleum products have been kept out of GST, and the current VAT and excise duty is being charged on these petroleum products as well. But the Constitution itself provides that on a subsequent date, on the recommendation of the Goods and Service Tax Council, these petroleum products will be brought into the GST regime. So essentially, currently petroleum products are not within GST, but going forward, it is expected that petroleum products will be merged into the GST regime and they will no longer be leviable to excise duty or VAT as the case may be. However, the case of alcoholic liquor, as we saw the last time, is different. The government, rather the parliament or the state legislature, has not intended to bring alcoholic liquor within the ambit of GST at any point in time, which is very clear from the definition of GST under Article 366(12) capital A, which defines goods and service tax to mean any tax on supply of goods or services or both, except tax on the supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. So there is a constitutional embargo on levying GST for alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Therefore, alcoholic liquor for human consumption will continue to be governed by the erstwhile excise and VAT law. So, excise, alcoholic liquor for human consumption, the duty of excise on that will be governed by entry 51, and VAT on intrastate sale of alcoholic liquor for human consumption will be governed by entry 54. All other goods have been brought into GST except petroleum products, which will be brought into GST in due course. So then I had dealt with what do we mean by alcoholic liquor for human consumption? What is the meaning attached to it? Because only if it qualifies as alcoholic liquor for human consumption, the states will have the power. If it's an alcohol other than alcoholic liquor for human consumption, the state will not have the power and it will be leviable to GST with the introduction of GST. And prior to GST, excise duty will be levied by the center and not by the state. So in that context, we saw the 7-judge bench decision of synthetics and chemicals. That judgment had clearly held that alcoholic liquor for human consumption will be liquor which is as it is consumable, in the sense that it is capable of being taken by human beings as such. So there is no further processing which is required on that alcohol to make it palatable for human consumption or to make it ready or to make it fit for human consumption. Even if alcohol requires further dilution by way of adding of water, etc., to make it fit for human consumption, till that point in time, till the point it is not capable of being consumed as such, it will not qualify as alcohol which is fit for human consumption. So a one step before, a step wherein you need to do further processing to make it fit for human consumption, even that alcohol will not be covered under entry 51 of the state list, and the state will not have the power to levy excise duty on the manufacture of that alcohol. Now this, as we have seen, has become an issue in GST because there are broadly, as I had stated, that there can be 3 types of alcohol. One is a denatured alcohol, other is a non-denatured yet concentrated alcohol, and third is non-denatured alcohol which is fit for human consumption. As regards non-denatured alcohol which is fit for human consumption, we are very clear that it will be leviable to state excise duty. Insofar as denatured alcohol is concerned, this cannot be consumed by humans as such because certain additives and certain solvents are mixed into this particular alcohol so that it cannot be consumed by human beings at all. This alcohol is largely used for industrial purposes. So because this can never be fit for human consumption, denatured alcohol has been kept outside the ambit of excise duty and it has been brought within the ambit of GST. So denatured alcohol leviable to GST. Non-denatured alcohol which is fit for consumption as such leviable to VAT. So the only residual category, as we saw, is non-denatured alcohol which is in concentrated form, wherein the alcohol concentrate is more than 80% or 85% volume by volume, whether that will be leviable to GST or whether that will be leviable to VAT and excise duty. As we have seen, the judgment of synthetics and chemicals holds the field in this. In my view, a non-denatured alcohol in concentrated form, because it is not fit for human consumption as such, it will not fall within entry 51 and it will be leviable to GST, and the state will not have the power to tax the manufacture of non-denatured concentrated alcohol. And although there is no specific entry in the rate notification under GST insofar as this non-denatured alcohol in concentrated form is concerned, but there is a residuary entry in GST, which is the serial number 453 of Schedule 3, which according to me is applicable to this case, and non-denatured alcohol in concentrated form can fall within this entry. There has been a back and forth in the GST Council meetings on whether this non-denatured alcohol, which is generally called as rectified spirit or extra neutral alcohol, which is not capable of being consumed as such, but with subsequent dilution, it is fit for consumption, whether that alcohol in that form should be leviable to GST or should be leviable to state excise. The Attorney General has opined that this should be leviable to GST, but the council has not taken a final decision on this. In my view, the council is not empowered to take a decision on this because council can only specify as to what goods will be leviable to GST. They cannot specify that these particular goods will be leviable to state excise or not. That is a question of constitutional interpretation. So unless the constitution is amended to give powers to the state to levy excise duty on this alcohol, GST council cannot do anything, in my humble opinion. So now, with this brief background, I'll move to the next topic of discussion, which I'm going to present to you. Another issue in the alcohol industry is with respect to job work. Now, what do we mean by job work? Now, job work, as we essentially know, is a treatment or a process that is undertaken by a person on the goods belonging to another person. That another person is colloquially referred to as the principal. So a principal wants to get something manufactured. He does not have the capacity to manufacture those things. So he will give all the raw materials to the job worker. The job worker will actually undertake the manufacturing on behalf of the principal and clear the manufactured goods back to the principal or to some other person on the instructions of the principal. So the ownership over the raw materials which are used in manufacture stays with the principal, but it is the job worker who essentially does the manufacturing activity. In the alcohol industry also, this is very common because there are brand owners. For example, UB Group. UB Group owns multiple brands, but they may not have the wherewithal to manufacture the quantity which is required by the market. So they may enter into contract manufacturing arrangements with various job workers, wherein all the raw materials, wherewithal, etc. will be made available by principal, including the formula for mixing of alcohol and other technical know-how in respect of that alcohol, and the job worker will actually undertake the manufacturing activity. Now, because the manufacturing activity has been undertaken by the job worker, so job worker is considered the manufacturer and he is liable to pay the state excise duty, because here, bear in mind, we're talking about alcoholic liquor which is fit for human consumption. So a principal gives the raw materials to the job worker manufactures the alcohol which is fit for human consumption. So the manufacturer in this case is the job worker and not the principal, because the job worker has used his skill, has used his labor to manufacture the new commodity. The job worker is the manufacturer of the alcoholic liquor which is fit for human consumption. So he is liable to pay excise duty on it because he is the manufacturer. Now the question is that because the job worker is undertaking this manufacture on behalf of this principal, he will definitely collect certain service charges, a certain amount from the principal for undertaking this manufacturing activity. Although all the raw material, technical know-how and the formulation, etc. has been provided by the principal, but the job worker has used his own labor, has used his own machinery to undertake that manufacture. So obviously, any commercial transaction will mean that the job worker will collect certain conversion charges. So now the question which comes up for consideration is that when the job worker is paying the state excise duty on the activity of manufacture, because he is manufacturing this alcohol for a principal, whether there can be a levy of service tax or GST on this conversion activity, this contract of manufacturing which the job worker has entered into with the principal, whether that particular conversion activity can be taxed independently as a service or not. So he has paid excise duty on the manufacture, but because he has undertaken that manufacture on for a third party for which he is receiving consideration, whether that manufacturing activity for a third party can independently qualify as a service. So the transaction is one and the same, that he is undertaking manufacturing for a principal. For that manufacture, he has paid excise duty. under the state list, entry 51. But because he's undertaking the manufacturing activity for a third person, is he liable to pay service tax also? Rather, whether the center is competent to levy service tax on this transaction as well as GST. So now if we see that this issue is not new, this particular provision existed in service tax also. Now, as we all know, in service tax, broadly, the law can be defined in two periods, which is post-negative list and pre-negative list. The negative list regime was introduced with effect from 1st of July 2012. So with the introduction of negative list, all services or all activities which are undertaken by one person for another person for a consideration was taxable, except those which are there in the negative list. So all activities are taxable except those which are in the negative list. Whereas prior to negative list, only specific enumerated services were made taxable or were made leviable to service tax. So that is the fundamental difference between a negative list taxation under service tax and pre-negative list taxation under service tax. Now, if we see pre-negative list under business auxiliary services, prior to 2009, all activities which amounted to manufacture, whether that is manufacture under the Central Excise Act or the state excise laws, in the sense whether it is manufacture of any commodity or manufacture of alcoholic liquor which is fit for human consumption, all those manufacturing activities are excluded from the definition of business auxiliary services. But in 2009, an amendment was introduced and said only those activities which amounts to manufacture of excisable goods will be excluded from the definition of business auxiliary services. Excisable goods was defined as those goods which are leviable to central excise duty under the Central Excise Act 1944. So any activity which amounts to manufacture of goods other than excisable goods under the Central Excise Act will still be included in the definition of business auxiliary services. So only that manufacturing activity which is considered as being leviable to Central Excise Act was excluded from the definition of business auxiliary services. Any other manufacturing activity of goods which are not covered by Central Excise Act can still qualify as business auxiliary service and leviable to service tax. Likewise, in the negative list regime also, when the negative list regime was introduced, there was a specific entry in the negative list which said that any process amounting to manufacture or production of goods will not be leviable to service tax. So any process amounting to manufacture or production of goods will not be leviable to service tax. But in 2015, they introduced an insertion in this entry that excluding alcoholic liquor for human consumption. So any process amounting to manufacture or production of alcoholic liquor for human consumption is not covered by the negative list. And because it is not covered by the negative list, it will fall within the definition of service and will be leviable to service tax. Likewise, in the definition of process amounting to manufacture or production of goods, they had said that it means a process on which duty of excise are leviable under Section 3 of the Central Excise Act, or any process amounting to manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption on which excise duty is leviable under the State Act. The particular portion which has been striked out in front of you, which is in red, was deleted with the amendments which were introduced in 2015. So with introduction of the Finance Act of 2015, the process of manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption was not excluded from the definition of the service because it was taken out of the negative list. Once it is taken out of the negative list, it automatically becomes a service which is leviable to service tax. Now, obviously, these amendments pose the question as to once the job worker who is paying excise duty under the state excise law, under entry 51 of list 2, whether for undertaking the very same manufacturing activity, can he be made liable to pay service tax for the conversion charges? Now, this question came up before the Honorable Delhi High Court in the case of Carlsberg India Private Limited. Now, in this case, the assessee tried to argue that what the job worker is undertaking is essentially manufacturing only. Now, that manufacturing he is taking, or rather, he is undertaking the manufacture for a third party. That does not deter from the fact that what he is doing is manufacture. Once manufacture is leviable to state excise, once it is covered under entry 51, automatically the parliament or the central legislature will not have the power to tax this transaction. Because as we have seen in the different lists which are there in Schedule 7, once an entry falls within list 2, then the center's power to legislate upon that particular entry is taken out. So the case of the assessee was that once manufacture of alcohol is falling within list 2, the center automatically cannot tax this transaction. However, the Honorable Delhi High Court drew a nuance. They said what is sought to be made amenable to service tax is the activity of contract manufacturing of alcoholic liquor fit for human consumption by one entity for another. So they said that tax on manufacture of alcohol is covered by state list, entry 51. Excise duty, but when you do that manufacturing activity for another person, then that is a different aspect, says, but manufacturing activity for another person is something which is not covered under entry 51, and that is why the center will have the power to tax under entry 97 of list 1, which is the residuary list. They said that the provision of service is in pith and substance not covered by entry 51, because what is sought to be taxed is the contract of service and not the manufacturing activity per se. What is sought to be taxed is the activity that the job worker is doing for the principal, and not the manufacture is an incidental object that it so happens that that activity is manufactured. But what is sought to be taxed is the activity and not the manufacturing operation per se. So the object is to tax the service, and the encroachment on entry 51 is merely ancillary. So they had applied the doctrine of pith and substance. So the doctrine of pith and substance essentially says that you look at the substance of the legislation. What is it that the legislature is trying to tax, and whether, when you look at the substance of the transaction, can it fall within a particular entry? If it can fall within a particular entry, then in that case, even if there is an incidental encroachment to another entry in another list, that encroachment will merely be incidental, and the power of the parliament or the power of the state to tax that particular transaction is not ousted. So long in substance a particular enactment or a particular levy falls within a particular entry, then an incidental encroachment, an ancillary encroachment in some other entry in another list will not make that particular legislation as being ultra vires the constitution. So they applied the doctrine of pith and substance to say in pith and substance, the encroachment to entry 51 is merely ancillary. What is thought to be taxed is not essentially the manufacturing activity, but the activity which is undertaken for the third person. The contract of service is what is sought to be taxed. And they also applied the aspect doctrine, as I've highlighted, that the aspect which is sought to be taxed is the contract of service and not the manufacturing activity per se. To reach this conclusion, they relied on two decisions of the Honorable Supreme Court. The first decision is the famous case of All India Federation of Tax Practitioners versus Union of India. And the second judgment is the Gujarat Ambuja Siemens case. Now, the facts before the Honorable Supreme Court in All India Federation of Tax Practitioners was that service tax was sought to be levied on chartered accountancy services and architect services. Now, these chartered accountants or architects were already paying professional tax. Professional tax is covered under entry 60 of list 2. So the state was levying professional tax. So once state is levying professional tax, a service tax cannot be levied by center for carrying out the very same profession. So by providing the professional services, once I am paying professional tax, you cannot make me amenable to service tax once again. This will amount to Parliament encroaching upon the state's exclusive power to make laws for the entries which are falling in list 2. Now, in this case, again, the Honorable Supreme Court applied the aspect doctrine. They said that a professional tax is levied because of the status of that professional. Because I am a chartered accountant, because I am an architect, the professional tax is levied. That I have that qualification and I'm a practicing chartered accountant or I'm a practicing architect. Because of the status of the person, professional tax is levied. Whereas service tax is not on the person, it is on the contract. Because that professional is providing a service to a third party, that contract of service is what is sought to be taxed and not the profession which is carried out by that person. Now, this nuanced discussion or this nuanced distinction was brought out by the Honorable Supreme Court by looking at the legislative entries in List 1 and List 2. Now, as we all know, there is a general proposition in law that all the entries which are there in List 1 or List 2 or List 3, we should be given widest possible interpretation. That it should be read as widely as possible. And whatever can even has a remote nexus with that particular entry should be covered within that entry. The court in this case brought out an exception to that general rule. They said that is correct, that whatever are the entries which are there in List 1 and List 2, they should be read in the widest manner possible. However, there is an exception to this, that taxing entries cannot be read in as wide a manner. So they do a distinction between general entries and taxing entries. They said taxing entries are specific entries which are enumerated in the Constitution. Though general entries can be read as widely, but the taxing entries has to be read strictly. And they said because the entry 60 of List 2, which talks about tax on profession, they said that is giving the power to the states to tax on the professional. So on the profession it can be, so it's a tax on profession. So that cannot be widened to bring within its ambit any contract of service which the professional is providing to the principal. That has to be a tax on profession, and the tax on profession can only be the tax which can be levied on that professional for holding that degree and carrying out his profession. But the individual contracts, the discrete contracts which the professional is entering for providing his service, that is an independent activity, and that cannot be falling within the specific scope of tax on profession, because tax on profession is a specific entry. It cannot be given a wide interpretation like general entries in the list. Like law and order is a general entry. A tax on profession is a specific entry. A tax on sale of goods is a specific entry. So only a tax on profession can be made liable to tax. Any incidental activity which arises out of it, or any other activity which has a connection with that profession, cannot be brought into tax insofar as entry 60 is concerned, because taxing entries are specific entries, and the general rule applicable to the generic entries under List 1 and List 2, that they should be given a wide interpretation. That cannot apply to specific taxing entries. Taxing entries has to be given a strict interpretation. That is what the court held in All India Federation of Tax Practitioners. So they said professional tax is a tax on profession, whereas the service tax is the contract of service or the activity which the professional is doing for a third party. So that is independent of entry 60, and that is why the center has the legislative competence to tax this transaction. Likewise, in the case of Gujarat Ambuja, again what had happened was the center sought to levy service tax on goods transport agency service and clearing and forwarding agency services. The assessees tried to argue that tax on goods and passengers is already covered under List 2. So tax on goods and passengers is covered under List 2. The center cannot levy service tax on GTA service or clearing and forwarding agency services, because nonetheless those are also that tax is also in respect of goods only, which are transported from one place to another, or a clearing forwarding agent who is basically moving the goods from one place to another. So nonetheless it's a tax on goods only. That is why the union will not have the power to levy service tax. They said that what is covered under the state list is a tax on goods or a tax on passenger. What is covered under service tax is the activity of performing a service by one person to another. So the contract of service is different from tax on goods or passengers. You cannot treat tax on goods or passengers so widely. So what is covered is only the tax on that particular goods. Service tax is not a good tax on goods. It's a tax on the contract. So it will not be covered within the ambit of tax on goods and passengers. Applying these principles, the Honorable High Court in Carlsberg, India, has said that activity of manufacture is an activity, but when that activity is done for another person, that makes it a service, which is a different aspect from the activity of manufacture. So because aspect doctrine is a well-established doctrine to tax different aspects of the very same transaction, that is the same transaction can be taxed with multiple taxable events which are possible, they apply the aspect doctrine. So the job work can still be leviable to service tax. Now, the assessee has gone on appeal before the Honorable Supreme Court in Carlsberg case, but in my view, the reasoning adopted by the Honorable High Court seems to be a plausible reasoning which can be arrived at basing the jurisprudence which has developed, and it will be a difficult case for the assessee before the Honorable Supreme Court. Bear in mind, that is my personal view, and it may very well possible that a new particular doctrine or a new proposition is raised by the Honorable Supreme Court. So, having looked at the constitutional aspects of taxing job work under service tax, now we will look at certain interpretational issues within GST. In my view, the ratio of Carlsberg will continue to apply in GST, and any service of job work amounting to manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption can simultaneously be taxed under state excise as well as GST, in my personal view. Now, assuming for a moment, okay, this particular job work activity in relation to manufacture of alcohol is leviable to GST. Now, what is the rate of tax which is applicable? Now, this is again a very interesting question, because if we see the rate notification under GST, there are two entries which are applicable. The first entry is service by way of job work in relation to all food and food products falling under chapter 1 to 22 in first schedule to customs tariff, which is leviable to tax at 5%. Then there is a residuary rate of 12%. So the question is, the job work activity in relation to manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption can qualify as food or food products. So whether alcohol will qualify as food or food products for it to come within the concessional rate of 5%, or whether alcohol will not qualify as food or food product and the residuary rate, the general rate of 12% will apply. So whether food includes alcohol or not, simply. That is the question which comes up for determination. Now, there is an appellate authority for advance ruling order in these facts, wherein they have said that food will not include alcohol. Now, this particular issue is not a new issue. Whether food products will include beverages, whether alcoholic beverages or non-alcoholic beverages, is something which the Honorable Supreme Court has been visited with on multiple occasions. The first case in the line of series of judgments is the case of Commission of Central Excise versus Parle Exports, which is 1988 Supreme Court judgment. There, the issue before the Honorable Supreme Court was whether non-alcoholic beverage bases are food products or food preparations. The Honorable Supreme Court held that in commercial parlance, beverages, bear in mind these are non-alcoholic beverages, they said in commercial parlance, beverages are not treated as food. Food and beverages are treated as independent categories of consumption. Both can be consumed, but food and beverages are known in the market differently. Food is something which is generally understood as a nutritive element, which is solid in substance, which is eaten, whereas beverage may be nutritive or may not be nutritive, but it is, you drink a beverage and you eat a food. So essentially in common parlance, food and beverage are different things. What is covered under the entry is food products and food preparations. And because beverage is different from food, it will not be covered under food products. And they also held that the first schedule to the tariff itself contains a heading food and beverages. So the tariff itself recognizes food and beverages as different elements. So that is why a non-alcoholic beverage base will not come within the definition of food or a food product or a food preparation. Similar proposition was laid down by the Honorable Delhi High Court in the case of Varun Beverages in the year 2013, wherein they followed the decision of Parle Exports. Now, insofar as alcohol is concerned, there is a decision of the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Kalyani Breweries. This is a 2001 judgment. Now, here, the issue before the Honorable Supreme Court was with respect to an exemption which is available for food processing machines or food packing machines. So there was an exemption which is available to food processing machines or food packing machines. The question was whether alcoholic beverages can qualify as food for it to come within. So a machinery which is required for manufacture of alcoholic beverages will qualify as food processing or food packing machine. So whether alcohol can be food or not. They said that the purpose of an exemption cannot be to include within its ambit an expensive expensive item like alcohol. It is to bring within its ambit a normal food item which is consumed by people on a day-to-day basis. Further, the state has always endeavored to prohibit alcohol because of Article 47 of Directive Principles of State Policies, wherein it says that the state will endeavor to prohibit alcohol and other narcotic substances. This, once the state has always endeavored to prohibit the consumption of alcohol, it could not have been their intention to provide an exemption in relation to manufacture of alcohol. So by applying this logic, they had said because alcohol is injurious to health, consumption of alcohol is injurious to health, the center could not have intended to provide an exemption for alcohol. Therefore, food will not include alcohol, and that's why exemption will not apply. So this was the case of Kalyani breweries. So going by the jurisprudence which has emerged over the last few years, it is very clear that the courts have always intended that food will not include alcohol. But there is a slight twist in this matter, and there is a possible argument. The Food Safety and Standards Act, which is the law governing the safety standards of preparation of food, in that act, food is defined to include alcoholic drink. So the domain legislation which governs the preparation of food and the safety standards of food includes alcoholic drink within its ambit. So because food includes alcoholic drink under the FSS Act, whether it is possible to argue that the domain legislation includes alcoholic drink within its ambit, and that is why applying FSS Act, the Food Safety and Standards Act, to the GST rate entry, it can be said that food and food preparations will also include alcohol within its ambit. Now, this is the principles which have been laid down, or the guidelines which have been laid down in the FSS Act have been borrowed for interpreting the entries under the Excise Act previously also. In fact, the Honorable Supreme Court, as late as in 2017, in the case of Parle Agro, understood various terms or phrases under the Central Excise Tariff by placing reliance on the FSS Act and the schedules made thereunder. So it is not new under Central Excise to make reference to the FSS Act to understand the ambit and the width of the entries under the Central Excise Act. Reference has been made to the FSS Act previously also in the Central Excise legislation. So an argument is possible that because FSS Act has been used previously to understand the entries under the Central Excise Tariff, I will also understand the meaning of the term food or food products by making reference to the FSS Act. And because FSS Act includes within its ambit alcoholic drinks, food will include alcoholic drinks, and that is why a concessional rate will be available even for manufacture of alcohol. Job work of alcohol, concessional rate will be applicable, and for this reference can be made to Parle Agro. Another interesting observation in Parle Agro was that common parlance test or commercial parlance test is not the only test which can be applied. So merely because the public understands a particular product in a particular manner, that is not the sole test. You can look at the technical meaning or the scientific meaning which has been given to that product and how the other pari-material legislation understand that product and use that meaning also. So common parlance or commercial parlance cannot be the only test. So applying this principle, even in our case, it can be argued that you need not go by common parlance or commercial parlance alone to say that food will not include alcohol. You can see other pari-material legislation, and one can argue that because under the FSS Act, food includes alcoholic drink, even GST rate entry should be understood in that perspective only or in that manner only. That is a possible argument. It may not be my view, but that is the view which is prevalent in amongst the tax practitioners. In my view, the FSS Act definition cannot be borrowed to understand the rate entries under GST. Now, there is a judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in State of Bombay versus Virkumar Gulabchand Shah, wherein a similar issue was, the court was faced with a similar issue, wherein whether turmeric under Essential Commodities Act can be understood as foodstuff or not. Whether turmeric will qualify as foodstuff or not, that was the issue before the Honorable Supreme Court. Supreme Court held that comparison of one act with another act is extremely dangerous. You should never directly compare one act with another act. Now, food and foodstuff can be used both in its widest sense possible or in a narrow sense. So there is the wide definition of food, there is a narrow definition of food. And the circumstances or the background in which a particular term is used has to be given preference to then simply borrowing a definition in a parametric legislation. That you need to see the context of that act, you need to see the object of that act and see whether a wide definition can be given or a narrow definition can be given or whether a definition in another act can be borrowed or not. So seeing the context and circumstance of a particular term only, you can borrow definitions from other legislations. If we see the customs tariff clearly recognizes food and beverages as separate items. In fact, HSN explanatory notes to chapter 22 recognizes alcohol as beverages. So beverages has been as a category of beverages includes within the ambit specifically alcohol. Once beverages include alcohol, in my view, it will be very difficult in the setting or in the context of customs tariff to say that alcohol includes food. In fact, in the case of Varun Beverages, which is the Delhi High Court judgment, there a similar definition of food was there in the Food Adulteration Act. Food Adulteration Act is the earlier avatar of Food Safety and Standards Act. So Food Adulteration Act was the law governing the safety standards of food prior to introduction of FSS Act. Food Adulteration Act had a similar definition as it was there in the Food Safety and Standards Act to say that food is defined to cover alcoholic drink. The assessee tried to place reliance on the definition of food under the Food Adulteration Act to say food includes alcoholic drink. That is why even food under central excise should be understood to include alcoholic drink. The court specifically negated this contention in Varun Beverages to say the context of Food Adulteration Act, which is the earlier avatar of Food Safety and Standards Act, is entirely different. That context and that meaning cannot be borrowed for the purposes of the Central Excise Act. So the definition of food under the Food Adulteration Act cannot be borrowed for understanding the entries in the Central Excise Act. So the argument of Food Safety and Standards Act that food includes alcoholic drink is in my view difficult to take to bring alcoholic drink within the ambit of food and foodstuff. Further, if we look at the dictionary meaning also, food has been defined to mean a nutrient in solid form as opposed to a drink. So even the dictionaries draw a distinction between food and drink. So that is why in my view, an alcoholic liquor will not come within the ambit of food and the same cannot be brought to tax at a concessional rate. Again, that is my view and it is possible to different interpretations. Now, the final topic that I'm going to deal with today is export of alcohol. Now, as we all know that because alcohol is under the state list, on export of alcohol, there are certain zero rating benefits which have been provided by the state legislature insofar as giving refunds of excise duty which is paid on export of alcohol. Now, I am not going to focus on what are the benefits which are available under the state excise act. I am going to see the implications of export of alcohol under the GST Act. Now, whether this export of alcohol this export of alcohol which is leviable to state excise will have any implications under GST. Now, as we all know, the levy of GST is on the supply. So there shall be levied on all intrastate supplies of goods or services a tax called the CGST Act. However, there is a specific exception under this particular levy, says that supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption is excluded from supply of goods or services. So there is a supply of alcoholic liquor, but that supply of alcoholic liquor will not be brought within the ambit of GST. So what do you mean by taxable supply and non-taxable supply? taxable supply, as we have seen, means the supply of goods or services which is leviable to tax under GST. Non-taxable supply means the supply of goods or services which is not leviable to tax. So if we see that supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption is a supply which is not leviable to tax. So it becomes a non-taxable supply for the purposes of GST. It is a supply, but it is a supply which is not leviable to tax. So it becomes a non-taxable supply under GST. Now, if we see exempt supply is defined to mean supply that attracts nil rate of tax, a supply which is wholly exempted from tax, and a supply which is a non-taxable supply. So alcohol supply is excluded from the levy of GST, which makes it a non-taxable supply. However, exempt supply includes a non-taxable supply. Therefore, an argument can be made that supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption, being a non-taxable supply, can be treated as an exempt supply. Because it's a supply which is not leviable to GST, that makes it a non-taxable supply. And because exempt supply includes non-taxable supply, exempt supply will also include supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Now, why am I talking about this entire circular argument of whether alcoholic liquor for human consumption can be treated as an exempt supply or not? Now, why I'm talking about this is because under 17(2) of the CGST Act, which is the provision with respect to availment of credit, this provision says that any GST which is paid on procurement, and a client in the alcohol industry will also have a lot of GST procurements like packing material, like bottles for undertaking the filling of alcohol, etc. All those procurements will be GST procurements because GST is payable on that. Section 17(2) says goods or services which are used by a registered person partly for affecting taxable supplies, including zero rated supplies, and which are partly for affecting exempt supplies, ITC will be restricted to the extent that it is attributable to exempt supplies. But ITC will be available to the extent it is attributable to taxable supplies, including zero rated supplies. So now, if we apply the exempt supply definition, if I am a client in the alcohol industry, I have made certain procurements, I will not be allowed to take input tax rate of the procurement to the extent it is used for making an exempt supply. And because exempt supply includes supply of alcohol, I will not be allowed to take any credit insofar as those procurements relates to supply of alcohol by application of 17(2). But if you see that if it is used for making zero rated supply or a taxable supply, then in that case, it will qualify as an eligible credit, and the procurements in respect of affecting taxable supply or zero rated supply, input tax credit in respect of those procurements will be available. Now the question that arises for consideration is, when I export alcohol, whether that will qualify as a zero rated supply, and whether input tax credit in respect of that export of alcohol will be eligible to me. To the extent of domestic supplies of alcohol, we know that alcohol being a non-taxable supply is an exempt supply, and by application of section 17(2), I will not be entitled to credit. But to the extent of export of alcohol, although it is an exempt supply because it is not leviable to GST, whether it can qualify as a zero rated supply, and a person will be entitled to credit of whatever procurements which are applicable to that export of alcohol. Now, if we see the definition of zero rated supply means export of goods. So, an export of goods has been defined to mean taking goods out of India to a place outside India. So, if I am exporting alcohol, goods definition under GST does not exclude alcohol. Goods definition, as we have seen, will mean all kinds of movable property. So, goods definition does not exclude alcohol. So, export of goods means taking goods out of India to a place outside India. So, if I take alcohol out of India to a place outside India, it will qualify as an export of goods. Once it qualifies as an export of goods, it will qualify as a zero rated supply. So, notwithstanding that it is not leviable to GST, by virtue of how zero rated supply has been defined in GST and the fact that exempt supply includes supply of alcohol, the fact is that zero rated supply can also include export of alcohol. So export of alcohol can qualify as a zero rated supply. So once export of alcohol qualifies as a zero rated supply, whether an assessee will be entitled to credit. Now for that, we come to section 16. Section 16 says that input tax credit may be availed for making zero rated supply, notwithstanding that such supply may be an exempt supply. So notwithstanding that a supply of a particular commodity may qualify as an exempt supply, you can still take the credit so long as it constitutes a zero rated supply. So let us apply the understanding of alcohol to this. Alcohol, as we all know, is a supply of alcohol is not leviable to GST, which makes it a non-taxable supply. Exempt supply includes within its ambit a non-taxable supply. Because exempt supply includes non-taxable supply, to the extent that exempt supply is exported, by virtue of this particular provision, you are entitled for input tax credit in respect of that export of exempt supply. So essentially, exempt supply will include non-taxable supply, which will include alcohol. So to the extent the alcohol is exported, into my mind, an argument can be made that that particular export of alcohol will qualify as a zero rated supply, and because of the applicability of this provision, an argument can be made input tax credit to the extent of the zero rated supply of alcohol, credit will be eligible. Now there are certain departmental circulars also which substantiate this view. So although alcohol has been kept outside the GST ambit, by virtue of a particular interpretation, the input tax credit which are leviable, the procurements which are leviable to GST, input tax credit in relation to those procurements can still be availed, and refund of those credits can still be availed. This is because, as we have seen, that if it's a zero rated supply, a person making such supply can claim a refund of input tax credit when he supplies the goods under bond or annuity. So when I am exporting the goods, when I am exporting alcohol, those goods are not leviable to GST. So obviously I will not pay any tax, but I am entitled for credit in relation to procurements which are made for exporting those alcohol because of the interpretation of 17, and by virtue of the benefits which are available to exports, I will be entitled for refund of those credits. So essentially, an exporter of alcohol, by this particular interpretation, can avail ITC on procurements which are used in relation to that export, and also claim refund of that accumulated ITC by taking the zero rating benefit. So this is a particular view which has come up in the industry, and something which I feel is a strong view, and it is possible for clients in the alcohol industry to explore the possibility of filing refund claims. So with this, I come to the end of my presentation. There are a couple of other issues which I wanted to cover, but due to paucity of time, I'll rest my presentation on these issues. If there are any particular questions which are there, insofar as the presentation of today is concerned or my previous presentation is concerned, I can take up now. And if it is possible that I may have gone wrong somewhere, because these are my interpretations, I may not have the view to understand all the concepts in depth, but I have made an attempt to give a perspective on these issues. And if there is any critique on these issues also, I am very well ready to understand and appreciate that. So thank you so much for attending the presentation today. I will now take up any questions.
Thanks, Rohan. That was indeed a very substantive and a very detailed explanation on your talk. I'll do one thing. I will give the option to enable to unmute yourselves, so that this can be a good round for discussion on this topic today. And anyone can unmute yourself if you want to substantiate any point, or if you want to ask any queries, you can do so. But I would only request that if anyone who is asking the questions, if possible, try to turn on the camera. Thank you. I'll enable the option to all the participants. Yes, if there are any questions, you can we can start.
Rohan, is there any special tax for wines?
No, no, sir. Wine is also covered under the state excise only because it qualifies as alcohol. It is not under GST. Continue the current state excise dispensation and VAT is only applicable to wines as well.
Rohan, can you clarify why are you clubbing exempt and zero rated together?
Yes, sir. Sir, what happens is that zero rated supply is an export. Any export will qualify as a zero rated supply. Supply of alcohol is a supply which is not leviable to tax, which makes it a non-taxable supply. Exempt supply include within its ambit a non-taxable supply. And the provision of zero rated supply says that you can avail the credit in respect of the procurements which are made for undertaking the zero rated supply, notwithstanding that it is an exempt supply. Because under the general scheme of SENVAT or ITC, if it's used for making an exempt supply, I'm not eligible for credit. But they create an exception insofar as exports is concerned, that if you are exporting an exempt supply, I'll still allow you for credit. So by my interpretation is that exempt supply, because it includes non-taxable supply, it will also include alcohol. So although alcohol is not leviable to GST per se, but because it can fall within the ambit of exempt supply, and if I export that exempt supply, it will be a zero rated supply. I will be able to get credit of my procurements and also consequent refund, which is a benefit available under zero rating.
But why does the legislature in its wisdom have these two titles?
Because exempt supply is a supply on
It's
which
by
you...
exemption. It is by virtue of an exemption.
No, correct. It can be by virtue of an exemption, but the law specifically defines exempt supply to include something which has been exempted by virtue of an exemption, or something on which the tariff itself does not provide a rate, or something which is not leviable to GST. So exempt supply by definition itself includes a non-taxable supply. That is why this interpretation is coming. And also there is a general proposition that an assessee should not export the taxes. Taxes should not be exported outside India. So this particular interpretation falls within that particular principle also, that you should not export the taxes and an assessee should be entitled to refund of his procurements, taxes paid on procurements.
Thank you.
Rohan, if I may add one other thing I feel is the GST, alcohol is caught between two regimes. One is the GST regime and the excise regime. While all the inputs are under the excise regime, the final, all inputs are under the GST regime, the final product is under the excise regime. So therefore, somewhere some benefit should be given. Otherwise, it will become definitely a tax on tax. An excise on GST, whichever way it is, there is tax on tax. Somewhere some benefit should be given. But if it is locally, if it is still fine. But when it is becoming export, that is where, as you said, clearly tax is being exported, etc. So therefore, the inputs are under one regime and final product is under different regime. At least there should be some benefit given to export. Therefore, maybe they have given it through the GST regime.
Yes, sir. Correct. I agree.
Can you just tell me which are the couple of points which you wanted to say? And again, even in the end game, there is a teaser. So,
no, so one issue that I was actually, I'll just share the screen because this issue, like, I don't have a definite answer. That's why. Just a second. So this particular case study I wanted to discuss. So in this, what happens is that I go to a hotel and there is a buffet which is offered. Now this buffet is including of all the cocktails and alcoholic drinks. Price of the buffet is 3,000 inclusive of all taxes. So there is no breakup per se when this buffet is offered. And this buffet includes a normal food also and alcoholic drinks also. So how to tax this transaction? How should hotel pay taxes on this transaction? One thing is, insofar as food and beverages other than alcohol is concerned, GST law takes care of it in the sense that that particular supply of food and drink other than alcohol is a service and there is a rate prescribed for that service. So I have no doubt that I need not vivisect food separately, alcoholic beverages separately, non-alcoholic beverages separately. Insofar as food and beverages other than alcoholic beverages is concerned, there is a particular category which is a service. But there is alcohol also which is being served, which is not leviable to GST. So when these two supplies are made together, which is supply of food and drink by way of a service and supply of alcohol for a single price, how will you tax this transaction? Because you have to pay VAT also in this transaction to the extent of alcohol served, and you have to pay GST also in this transaction. So the question of taxability is clear, but how will you apportion values for this? But generally what I have seen is that when buffets are there, there is a with alcohol buffet and without alcohol buffet. So that if it's without alcohol, it may be 2,000 all inclusive, and if it's with alcohol, 3,000 all inclusive. So the difference can be taxed as being attributed to alcohol. But if it's an all inclusive buffet, how will you tax this transaction?
So the question is whether it will fall under mixed supply and get taxed twice. One by way of inclusion in a taxable supply, other by way of that being taxed separately under the value-added tax regime, etc.
Correct. To my mind, the entire value cannot be taxed under GST, because although this can be a mixed supply conventionally, as how mixed supply is understood in GST, that a mixed supply can be two or more supplies, which can be a non-taxable supply also. But to include the charges attributable to alcohol in for GST valuation by applying the concept of mixed supply will be colorable, because something which is otherwise not leviable to tax, can the entire value be brought to tax under GST is a question which I think will require further deliberation.
When these cars or motorbikes are sold by the dealers, the Motor Vehicle Act says that it should be supplied with a sufficient amount of petrol to take it at least to the nearest petrol bunk. And petrol is also outside the GST regime. And the vehicle is sold along with petrol. Of course, nobody charges separately for the petrol. So there also a single price is there. I think the similar question is there. So whichever fuel it is, there is a problem there.
Rohan, I have another question.
Yes,
you tried to distinguish between the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act and the Food Safety and Standards Act. First of all, the Food Safety and the Food Adulteration Act might be a precursor to the new act, the FSSAI Act. But the point is, when that particular act, which covers all the aspects containing food, also defines alcohol as food, why do you say that that should not be taken into consideration for the purpose of GST? Or why the Supreme? You see, the case laws you refer to are all pertaining to the old act, not the new act. There are no judgments in the new act, Food Safety Act. Now, secondly, how relevant is it? The slide on your screen shows Webster's definition. The taxing acts do not fall back upon a dictionary meaning of word. Common parlance I can understand, but how can you say that I will not borrow a particular definition of food from one act into another act for consideration?
Sir, I think we will have to look at the object of legislation. The Food Safety and Standards Act, the object is that anything which is consumed in the market, or which is...
Just sorry to interrupt. In the very same slide, you posted the customs tariff where alcohol comes under beverages.
Right. Yes.
So therefore,
So
it is food.
Yes, sir.
So why do you say you should not take the definition from the Food Safety and Standards Act?
Because the customs tariff recognizes alcohol as beverages, and food and beverages have been generally understood as two different categories. Both are consumable, but food and beverages are definitely different categories. Once alcohol is recognized as beverages under Chapter 22, to my mind, applying the definition of food under the Food Safety and Standards Act, which the object is to ensure that the food which is prepared, or the preparations of food stuff, or any other ancillary matter in relation to food industry everything is covered. That is why they have defined food in a very broad manner. In fact, if you see the definition of food under the Food Safety and Standards Act, it excludes drinking water. So whether by that logic, whether drinking water will not be beverage.
There is a separate category of bottled water, mineral water.
Correct. But it
Under the
excludes,
FSSAI Act.
yes, but it excludes drinking water as such.
Ordinary water which you catch from a tap is not taxed.
No, the purpose is not to tax. No. Food Safety and Standards, it's not a taxing legislation. Yes, sir.
No,
Again, your view is a possible view, sir. In fact, in Parle Agro also, they have.
My only suggestion was that people can make use of the definition of food under the new act for the purpose of interpretation of food as defined under the GST regime.
Yes, sir. That's a possible interpretation. I agree.
Thank you.
Anyone else who wants to supplement on this?
It will come under beverages or it will be under GST? Toddy. Whether it is food
I
or
don't know the constituents of toddy, but what I understand of toddy, I think it should be alcohol. But I am not very sure.
No, toddy, everything comes under alcohol.
Alcohol.
And it comes under state excise. It is taxed by the.
Yes, yes.
Where
There is
not-
also something called Nira, no? There is also something called Nira.
Nira and toddy.
Nira is
comes under.
toddy.
Maharashtra, etc., they use, I think, word Nira, and we use the
Yes.
Kalna, Toddy, etc. Also,
Both are one and the same.
Anyways, I think this was a wonderful session again by Rohan today. He has covered the topic
Yeah, but-
very.
But what happened to Natarajan's post in the tax bar chat box was?
Start recording.
A question from Mr. Saravanan in the chat box. He says water that is other than aerated, mineral, purified, distilled, medicinal, ionic, battery, demineralized, and water sold in sealed container is not taxable under GST. Hence, unpackaged water and unprocessed water is tax-free under GST. That is his view on the food and beverages discussion which Dr. Krishnanand and Rohan were having.
No, that is
So-
correct. What he's saying.
Okay.
So with this, I think this was a wonderful session. Thanks, Rohan, for this second session on GST on alcohol. The end game was really good. So
Endgame
thank you once again.
Endgame is yet to come.
End game. So thank you all for joining us on this 110th webinar on Sunday morning. And this, thanks for this open discussion round. This session will be uploaded in our YouTube channel also. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.